part of the journey, the Enneagram, is to reclaim what the virtue of our type is. And that's to come back to who we truly are, who we are truly created to be. You can start to reconnect to this virtue, this higher emotional intelligence, and our minds start to become unclouded, and we start to perceive God's reality more clearly, and we start to have thinking and feeling that's just less affected, less conditioned in us.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Certain Success Podcast. I'm Matt Fagioli, your host, and today's interview is with my friend Scott Allender, who wrote this book, The Enneagram of Emotional Intelligence, which is a complete nerd fest, so get ready. But man, if you want to start to figure out who you really are and go forward in the journey of seeking the wholeness of who you are as you're trying to build your business, then Enneagram is a huge, powerful tool, emotional intelligence, and starting to get a real understanding of who you really are. These are incredibly powerful tools, and he's packed them all into one book that was just recently released. And so today we get to have this awesome, powerful conversation with author Scott Allender. So sit tight. Here we go. Hey, Scott, welcome to the Certain Success Podcast. Man, I cannot wait to dive into this conversation. And as I was telling everybody at the introduction to this conversation, your book hit me in a big, big way. And the subtitle of your book is so close to the mantra of the Certain Success Podcast, which is, the intersection of business and faith. That I just thought, man, this is just a home run conversation for our audience, which is a bunch of business owners who are, out trying to kill it in the business world, but also trying to become a whole human being. And you've got the two of the biggest rocks there are in terms of the Enneagram, and emotional intelligence there. So, dude, let's dig in. Thanks for being here.
Well, thanks for having me, Matt. I'm delighted to be here.
Can you give us just a little bit of background? How'd you get here? Why'd you write this book? Tell us who you are.
Yeah. So I've been working with teams and leaders for a number of years, trying to just help them make sense of the challenges that they face and kind of reframe some of the problems they're trying to solve. And one of the ways that I approach it, not always, depends on the audience, of course, is through this idea of building more self-awareness, awareness of how I'm seeing things, how I'm feeling about things, how I'm thinking about things, and therefore how I'm trying to make sense of my challenges. And so I've been doing that work for a number of years. One of the tools in my toolkit has been emotional intelligence, right? We know emotional intelligence is so important for our personal success and well-being. And so I've been working with it for a number of years. Simultaneously, personal journey for about the last decade has been through the Enneagram. And so I wanted to bring these two systems together in a really sort of nuanced way to try to accelerate and advance the emotional intelligence conversation to make it make more sense for people. Because, Matt, one of the things I found is that when I ask people about emotional intelligence, they struggle to define it, right? We hear about it. Especially in leadership, you're told you need it. Okay. And then I ask you, so what is it? And you kind of can give a general definition. And then we say something like, okay, so what are you doing to get it and develop it? And nobody knows, right? Nobody's really doing anything.
Nobody's doing anything. They're like, we already have it, right? Which is, so one of the things that one of the things that I've heard you talk about is the fact that the more you think you have emotional intelligence, the less you have it, or something like that, to put words in your mouth.
It's awareness specifically. So the cornerstone of emotional intelligence is this idea of awareness, which I was referencing. This massive study came out a number of years ago, and what they found was as maybe only 13 to 15% of people are truly self-aware. And as you just pointed out, the study also revealed that the more self-aware you think you are, the opposite is likely to be true. So you've got this studies happening on the importance of emotional intelligence, suggesting that 70% or more of our personal success and our professional success is directly linked to emotional intelligence measures, the cornerstone of which is this thing called self-awareness. And we don't have it, right? Or maybe a less indicting way to say it, and I don't know if this is me probably taking some liberties, is that at best we're probably only self-aware 10 to 15% of the time
Yeah.
as people.
Well, and it's not this one of the things that, I heard you quote that study, and I actually heard you quote that before. And I'm like, how did they come up with this math equation? And what questions did they ask to
Yeah.
determine that, and I don't want to nerd out too much on that, but can you unpack that just a little bit?
Well, yeah, I actually didn't see the details of the questions. I only saw the outputs. It was published in a book called Insight by Tasha Eurich, and she was part of a big study with a university, and they did all this research. So I don't know which questions and how they did the statistical analysis and validation and all of that kind of inner working stuff. But the output was alarming. But at the same time, I found it as an emotional intelligence coach unsurprising, because I would do emotional intelligence inventories with leaders, sit down with them, go over the results, and nobody was surprised by anything they saw, right? I'd point out and say, okay, there's an imbalance here. Seems like maybe you're a little hard on yourself. Yeah, that's true. Seems like here in the stress area, this could be an issue. Oh, yeah, that's a big issue for me. Like, I didn't need them to give them the inventory. They already knew all this stuff, right? What they didn't know was what to do about it. And so the Enneagram for me, as I was saying, was so personally powerful, is that what the Enneagram does is it takes you on a voyage to what is unconscious in us. So these parts of ourselves that we just don't pay attention to, we call it the stuff that's in our shadows. It's just out of sight. And so much of that stuff, which includes wounding messages we received as a child, core fears that developed as a result of it, sort of latent desires that we're not fully connected to. All this stuff gets kind of pushed out of our psyche, out of our conscious awareness, because it's just too painful, right? We don't want to deal with it. So we construct these things called personalities. And if you look at the root word persona, it actually means mask. We construct these sort of defenses, these personalities, these masks as a way to show up in the world and get our needs met and protect these things that are wounded in us, these sort of traumas in us. And so we have this like approach to life that's very driven by one of nine core archetypes. That's the nine Enneagram types. And it's part of who we are, but it certainly is not all of who we are. In some ways, we've all shown up to ourselves and other people wearing these sort of masks of personality. So it's not a surprise to me when we get a result that says, yeah, most of the time we're not self-aware, or 13, 15% of people are self-aware, because we're not even really aware that we're wearing these masks until we're able to look under the hood and go, oh yeah. And so that's what I wanted to bring together in this book, is to say, okay, the emotional intelligence part has been studied and validated. We know it's critical. We're not getting very far with it. I think we need a system to go deeper into ourselves to find out what's in there that we have kind of lost touch with.
And, when I first found the Enneagram, like so many people, it just hits me like a ton of bricks, like poof, oh my gosh, how have I not seen this before? And it can be so powerful. And one of the things that is different about Enneagram, if you dig into it, so you can mess with it for a minute, find your number. And I actually, now that I guess in hindsight, I did that a couple of years earlier. Oh yeah, okay, I know what my number is, whatever. Put it on the shelf like Myers-Briggs or DISC or anything else. Like, this is my profile, cool. But then when I came back to it and it really hit me in the face, and then I really took the time to dig in and go deeper, it's like, oh, this is a vehicle to tremendous healing, to tremendous wholeness, to tremendous understanding of myself. And I think that's, my perspective of why it's so powerful. But talk about Enneagram a little bit from your perspective and how it ties together to the book and emotional intelligence.
Well, I have similar origin story as you do, which is I found my type. It became interesting cocktail party conversation. That was pretty much the end of it. Um, and it wasn't until I opened the book with this where I'd actually just left a meeting talking about building awareness with a team. And I get in my car and I'm in a perfectly good mood. And I'm driving down the interstate and I'm going about 70 miles an hour. And suddenly my heart just starts beating really erratically and I feel flush and I feel like I'm going to faint. And I have never experienced anything like this before. So I thought I was having am I having a cardiac episode? What's happening? So I make my way off and call 911 and paramedics come. And long story long, um, it was an anxiety attack. And that became my entry point to go deeper because I had no idea why this had happened. Like, it was a story I thought I would never share with anyone, let alone write about and publish it. But I write about it because for me, it was my body sounding an alarm, um, of dealing, trying to bring into my conscious awareness all of this stuff that I had hidden away, including my own emotional experience and my own sense of personal worth and identity. And so that was my moment where I said, "All right, I know enough about the Enneagram to know that there might be something here to help me." And then it set me off on this sort of journey. And then I went through my certification process and all the things. Um, and that was that discovery process, which is ongoing, by the way, right? I'm not there yet. I'm still discovering all the time. Um, that was years into that is when I said, you know what, I want to bring these systems together because there's five particular measures that I cover in the emotional intelligence framework, which is self-perception, how we see ourselves. And we learn that through our Enneagram types, we see ourselves partially correctly, but we don't perceive all of who we are because again, we have these sort of personas that are in the way. And then that impacts the second measure of emotional intelligence that I use, which is how we express ourselves. So how we see ourselves is inextricably linked, therefore, to how we express ourselves. And all of that leads us to the third measure, which is the state of our interpersonal relationships and how we show up to them. And then the fourth attribute is all around how does all of this influence the decisions I make, both personally and professionally. And then the final component is how I deal with stress, basically. So those are the sort of five measures that's in the emotional intelligence system I use. And I look at those through all nine Enneagram types. And each one of those nine types have very different ways they show up to that. And just that process alone, when I do this with teams, it starts to really build a lot of relational currency because you start to go, oh my gosh, I had no idea that you see this situation that way, or that you have this thing that, this is your frames. Like, I didn't know that. And one of the things for me is I was like, gosh, I've shortchanged myself. I've been stuck on this type. I've only been seeing the world from one of nine possible vantage points. And I feel a little ripped off from that. Like, I want to open up and start to see more. And that's the other part that's so beautiful about the Enneagram that sets it apart from other systems. It doesn't just tell you your type, it tells you where you got stuck and how to get unstuck. We're meant to contain all nine types. We over identify with and get stuck in one place because that's how we needed to get our needs met. That's how we made sense of the stories we grew up in. And it served us, and we can be grateful for it. And then, as Carl Jung says, and I always mess this up, so I paraphrase this very extremely, what works for you in the morning of life will work against you in the afternoon of life. There comes a point where that strategy, that personality strategy, starts to not work, and then it actually starts to work against you. And then that's when a lot of people actually come to the system and say, wow, I want to find out all the ways that I'm working against myself. When I did my certification, it included 3 1-week full intensives in person, among a bunch of other things. And the first thing I noticed when I walked in is the average age in there was probably 50, and there's people that were like 35 all the way to like 75. And I'm like, this is that Carl Jung quote come to life. These are people who they've reached a stage in life and they're like, I want to know why this isn't working. Like, why am I stuck here? Like, there's more to me than this.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. There's so many tie-ins. My I guess the thing I live and breathe in all the time is spiritual development and
Mm,
transformation, and so there's so many connections and parallels from what you're saying into that world, and so much conversation about the first half of life versus the second half of life, and
mm,
success versus significance being also tied in there. Of course,
mm.
everybody talks in terms of midlife crisis and all this stuff, and I think one of the easiest ways to look at it too is just in terms of, I love this image of the wall. So, we all hit the wall in life
Mm.
over and over and over again. You already talked about one example of you having this panic attack. To you, that was you hitting a wall.
Mhm.
Like, what is this? And how do I get past this, or can I get past it?
Yeah.
Or is the only way out to go through? You chose to go through by doing the work to
Yes.
figure out, the story, and so, I've had many of those walls in my life, and that kind of is what makes you stop long enough to really evaluate. And I think you have to be at least 35 to have, in
Yeah.
most cases, to have
Agree.
had that experience at least once.
Uh,
So
yeah.
anyway,
I mean, there's certainly old souls in the world that have done it a little bit sooner, but yeah, I think you kind of do. You have to have an ego before you can transcend the ego, right? It takes a minute.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So we'll talk about that a little bit. I mean, do you see what I described there as being true? Like, do most people come to this kind of real serious effort toward all of this material when they hit a wall like that, or what are the things that bring people to that turning point?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, certainly not always as pronounced as my experience, and that was just one of a couple of experiences, not anxiety related, where I knew I needed to go on this journey. But I think for everyone that I talk to, it's like there's just that sense that what got me here won't get me there, or what worked for me to this point isn't working for me any longer. And I think that shows up in different kind of ways. And usually, the people that get the most out of it, I think, are the people who they don't have a shame response to that, or a guilt response to that, or a self-condemnation response to that. They have a deep curiosity. And that curiosity is what opens them up to going on this sort of self-exploration journey, because it can be tough and it can even be painful at times, confronting some of the wounding messages that informed why we kind of got stuck where we did. That's not for the faint of heart. That can take a bit of courage. You have to look at some stuff, right? There's reasons you put that stuff away in the shadows of your awareness. It's safer over there. Don't shine a light in that corner, Matt. Just keep it off your radar, right? And then if you do that, I know people too um, that are still really, really struggling in their later years because they never did shine the light in there, and I didn't want that to be me. So, um, but it's all meant to be done with self friendship and self compassion and just curiosity. It's not. It's a very it can be a fun journey. Like I said, it can be a little bit painful, and it can be a little, but it's not all painful. It's also can be humorous. Like I've found moments in my own sort of self inquiry where it's like you look back and you kind of laugh at yourself and why you did what you did. So, um, yeah, I think there's many reasons people come to it, but openness and curiosity are the keys to making it work for you.
You actually accidentally hit on the premise of why this is called the Certain Success Podcast, because this is for business leaders who, but you don't want to go down the road of life and get to the end and go, oh, like I missed all of this, like all the wholeness of who I was supposed to become, right? I've got $50 million in the bank, but my heart is, my soul is empty, right? So that was the point of that branding, and you just kind of touched on it there. So it's hopefully everybody's going to find their way to this journey, and then not bail when they get there, because I think I did that more than once in my 55 years. Go like, oh, okay, I kind of see that. I'm too busy.
Well, I know Enneagram teachers now who talk about how they did that as well, right? Like they came to it, peeked behind, the wall a bit, saw the wizard back there, didn't like what they saw, put it away, and left it alone for a while, and then sort of came back around to it a couple years later when other circumstances pointed them back and back and back towards the work they needed to do.
Yeah. Well, and we talked about this off camera that, to me, the whole journey is the faith journey, and Enneagram is a tool. In my mind, Enneagram is one of the tools toward becoming the wholeness of what God created you to be. And so the language is very, very close there. But to me, it's really significant to use it in that vein. And you and I talked a little bit about that too. Can you expand on that a little bit? Because what we were talking about earlier was the fact that Enneagram is not necessarily a Christian thing, or not. It's just the two are independent things. Yet we've got really since the beginning of recording Christianity for 2,000 years, you've got Christian leaders over all that time who have looked at Enneagram and gone, oh, this is a useful tool to help shine a light on yourself and look in the mirror better. Can you talk a little bit about that intersection?
Yeah, I think, thanks for bringing that up, because I think it's an important part of the conversation. I think anything there's no book of Enneagram in the Bible, right? That doesn't exist.
Right.
And nor would I want there to be anything like that, right? And I don't want people to think that this is some kind of religious thing. It's a sense-making system that points us at certain truths and gives us certain language and insights that we would struggle to have without a system like that. And one of the things that it points to is that in these personalities of ours, so I don't know how familiar your listeners are, but I can maybe just do around the all 9 types really quick, right?
Yeah,
So,
great.
type ones tend to be called the perfectionists or the improvers, and they are largely and often unconsciously motivated by this fear that they're bad, wrong, or corrupt in some way. Type twos tend to be the pleaser or the befriender, or sometimes called the giver. And they have this often unconscious fear that's motivating this strategy, as described by the names, of being unwanted, unloved, or unneeded in some way. Type threes are known as the achiever or the performer. And what they're covering up for is this fear that aside from what they achieve and do, they have no real worth. Type fours they're called the individualists or the romantic. They have a fear that they are insignificant or fatally flawed somehow, and that informs their personality structure. And then types fives are known as the investigator or the observer. And there's other names as well. And they have this fear of being overwhelmed, and they almost fear being overwhelmed by their own emotions. And so that informs their personality strategy. Type six are known as the loyalist. Oftentimes, they have the most fear of any of the Enneagram types, and so much of that fear that's often hidden from conscious awareness is this sense that they are without support or guidance, and that they're afraid they're going to live in chaos. Sevens are known as the enthusiast. They tend to be very, very good storytellers and lively personas, and very optimistic. They're often, what's unconscious in them often until they open up and do this work, is that they're moving away from this fear of being deprived or trapped in pain forever and ever. So they never want to slow down to let pain or anything that could catch up to them and make them too sad. Eights are known as the challenger because they're willing to take on challenges and face challenges, and they tend to be the most powerful and the most kind of intense type. And their fear that's often unconscious is the fear of being controlled. So they never want to be vulnerable or show weakness of any kind. And then nines are known as the peacemakers, or the mediators. And they kind of have this general sense of what it would be like to be any of the nine types. And it gives them this gift of being great mediators and things. And the fear for them is being cut off from important people. And so their strategy is to merge and go along with other people so that they never have any kind of conflict. They fear conflict. Now, that's a whistle stop tour of kind of the names and the some of the core fears that might lie underneath. But to go back to the spiritual question, which is where you started, because these fears exist, these types are overcome with what's known as the passion of the type or the emotional vice of the type. Now, these passions, now I'm not talking about passion like, you're passionate about music or something you enjoy. Think of it as like a crime of passion, right? It's this all-consuming emotional experience that informs and colors all of our other emotional experiences, all of the ways that we sort of see and make sense of things. And so if you look at the 7 of the 9 passions, they're the 7 deadly sins of Christianity, right? So for ones, it's the passion of anger. For twos, it's pride. 3 is not part of the 7. It's called self-deception. 4s, it's the passion of envy. 5s, it's the passion of greed or avarice. 6, it's fear. So that's not part of the traditional 7. 7s, it's gluttony. 8s, it's lust. And 9s, it's sloth. And this is the dominant emotional experience that, again, controls us and not the other way around. It's like being in the grip of that sin. And it's not this sort of conscious choosing, right? Nines don't choose to engage with sloth. And as they soon learn when they go on the journey, is that what the sloth that they experience is a sort of psycho-spiritual self-forgetting, that they go to sleep to themselves to avoid being in any kind of conflict, because conflict is what they fear. So part of waking up is to go, gosh, I start to see and observe all the ways that this passion is controlling me. And I don't want that, right? I want to return to a truer God given sort of created way that I was meant to be before my lived experience caused me to start to unconsciously put on all of this defense and all of this personality and to be ruled by this passion. And it's guiding my life on autopilot. And oh, yeah, by the way, it's not a big surprise when you start laying that out. This is why we're not self-aware. Who knew that we had this sort of emotional vice, this passion, this sin that's sort of like informing how we see things, that we're trying to move away from these fears, and these fears are tied into these wounding messages that our caregivers intentionally or unintentionally gave to us because it's how we interpreted our world and all of that. And what's beautiful about the Enneagram is that this might be getting you can stop me if I'm going
Well, it's
too
funny
nerdy
because
on
I'm
this.
like, all me and all every other business owner is just like, all right, I'm ready to jump off a cliff now. And but what's interesting is, like, I get it. I'm with you, and I'm like, okay, I know I got to do the work, but man, it's a lot. So, but as you started to unpack there, it's like when you start pulling back the layers, it's like, oh, this makes total sense, and oh my gosh, I want to put this genie back in the bottle, and
Well, yeah. 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 I've wanted to do that many times in my own life, if I'm honest. But if you can excuse me just nerding out for one more minute, because I'm going to
sure,
close the loop on your
okay,
spiritual question.
yeah,
The passion of the type is our untrue selves, right? This is the part that's been sort of overtaken by this thing, right? Part of the journey of the Enneagram is to reclaim what the virtue of our type is. And that's to come back to who we truly are, who we are truly created to be. And you can see and glimpse it sometimes when you see people doing this work. And so instead of, for examples, I'll just give a couple. So when you do this work, you can start to reconnect to this virtue, this higher emotional intelligence, and our minds start to become unclouded and we start to perceive reality, God's reality, more clearly. And we start to reconnect to God's plan, and we start to have thinking and feeling that's just less affected, less conditioned in us. So the one, for example, instead of being a perfectionist because they're trying to sort out this message that they, can't make mistakes or that mistakes are bad, they suddenly like acknowledge that there's this holy perfection in the universe that has nothing to do with them. Like God's holy perfection is there, and it's not up to them to fix everything. And twos move away from trying to pridefully decide who and what they will do to help, and that their advice tends to be the best advice and the only advice. And they return to this acknowledgement that God's holy will is alive and well in the world, and they don't need to assert their will everywhere. And you can go down all nine types, and you see this reclaiming of an acknowledgement and an ability to see the divine plan, and that you don't have to do so much heavy lifting to see that divine plan come to fruition.
Man, that's awesome. Yeah, I think, you nailed a lot of it. And I think just to kind of, just punctuate that a little bit, I think that people, when they go on a faith journey, whether they're, brand new in their faith or they've been walking it for a long time and they're just trying to figure out what's next or what does this really mean, we don't always have the tools to really unpack it. Like, you've got the Bible, and then it's like, well, okay, what do I do after that? Like, what else is there? What other tools can I use to, really go deeper and figure out who I am? How do I fit into this universe? And what is it that God put me here for? All those things. And I just think that, the Enneagram and your book, levels that up, I think, as a tool to take that specific journey, and not everybody's going to use it that way, and not everybody's going to agree with the context that I'm putting on it. But I appreciate your willingness to kind of come down that piece of the road there.
Yeah, well, my pleasure. Yeah, it's been it continues to be. Like I said, I'm just a bozo on the bus with everybody else. I've had some experiences, I've had some moments, and I hope that, by putting them together in this book and it seems to be, the feedback I've gotten is quite positive. People feel like it's helping them. And I'm just trying to contribute to the conversation.
Well, I've never heard the phrase bozo on the bus, but I like it. I might steal that. But I do think it's interesting to talk about the fact that I heard you say this in a way, and others talk about the fact that, this is not a linear path to an end, and you're like, boom, done, emotionally intelligent, Enneagram, yeah, I'm done. Like, there actually is no done. In my view, my worldview, there's no done until we meet Jesus, and the whole journey from here to there is to just keep inching, forward. And I can't remember what metaphor you used, but I've heard it talked about as an upward spiral of like, you're gonna fall too. You're gonna make, you're gonna fall back and go like, wait, how can I be here when I was just there? Right.
Yeah. So the symbol itself is a circle and a triangle and a hexad. And those are all the points brought together. That's what the Enneagram symbol is made of. And they all have a bunch of meaning behind it. And I'm not going to bore your audience with it. But that hexad in the middle, it kind of has this rising and falling, which in part symbolizes what the path to awareness is. It's a constant rising and falling. It is not a straight line on any level. I've gone from high awareness to low awareness in the same meeting, let alone the same day. So it's a rising and falling, and it's building the awareness of what's happening when I'm falling. Right now, I have more language. I have more ability to observe, like what was going on in me, what I was believing about myself and the other person, what fear I was carrying, what frames I was holding, and I didn't used to have that. So I don't stay in the lower as long before I can start to like rise back up.
That's really well. You nailed it right there. It's like, how fast can I self-arrest? How fast can I turn it back? I always use the metaphor of, driving on the highway. Like, if you and I get in two cars and you cut me off, I'm going to forget everything I know about emotional intelligence in like 3 milliseconds. but I also will probably catch myself pretty quickly. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
oh man.
Totally.
Well, dude, I really appreciate it. I know the audience is going to get a ton out of this. How do they dig deeper? How do they find you and your book and everything else?
Yeah, thank you. ScottEallender.com is a good link to go to. That's SCOTTEALLENDER.com. Or you can find the book on any of your favorite online retailers. I also co-host a weekly podcast called The Evolving Leader. You want to check that out. And I'm on Instagram. I post a lot about the Enneagram on an Instagram account called @EQ Enneagram.
Awesome, man. Well,
So have a look.
we'll link to all that stuff in the show notes, and grateful to have you as a new friend, and I hope you'll come back here soon.
Same, my pleasure. Back anytime.
Awesome, man. See you guys.